Yo, CR again with another top 10 video. This time, top 10 favorite video game soundtracks. I'm gonna loosen the restrictions on this list just a little bit. One of the entries on the list is the entirety of the series, while another is 2 games in a series. The only 100% unbreakable rule is that I need to have at least being a key word for one of the games, beaten the game beforehand. So without further ado, let's start with number 10. Pajama Sam is one of my favorite childhood games, coming from Humongous Entertainment. This game being on the list is mostly nostalgia based, but I'm gonna indulge myself for a second here. A lot of the background is mostly what you hear throughout the game as you try to figure out what to do, which isn't really hard, but that's besides the point. So, in a way, the soundtrack is keeping you company as you go through this weird and incredibly strange world. With most things being alive in some way or the other, a comforting and chill soundtrack is kind of the way to go, with pleasant and moody tracks. Again, this is mostly nostalgia based, as I've played through this game many times as a child, and I've actually streamed it as an adult, so I have a lot of fond memories listening to the background as I played through this point and click adventure. Let me explain myself a little with why I picked the entire Dot Hack series and not just one of the games. I honestly love all the games. I would actually put this higher on the list if I could have picked from one, but every game feeds into each other, playing some of the same tracks throughout the series, that being Dot Hack / Infection to Quarantine and the GU part 1 to 3. With different parts to the series, if I could narrow down to either GU or original, I'd have to say GU, as while I definitely like the MMO feel of the original, which the game is centered around, I've played GU a lot more, and many of the tracks I would listen to for hours as I grinded through the games on PS2, trying to 100% each, which is no easy task, but was a joy to do with no backing tracks getting old, except maybe the biking portions, but even those made me laugh when I would do them. This is one of the many games that made me feel immersed in the world, and one of the only series where I genuinely liked the more orchestra to godlike music with humming and whatnot that I've generally gotten bored of recently from games such as Final Fantasy. You know, games trying to make you see the awe of the moment and trying to make it seem godlike as if you weren't also watching the same moments. If you like that kind of thing, more power to you, but this boy has had enough. This is also one of the couple games I actually own the soundtrack to, which is another reason why I like it. I broke this up into the 2 games that I've actually played in the series because I realized I loved both the soundtracks equally, and I've probably listened to both the same amount as well. With Star Fox 64 being one of the first games I ever played, you can kind of guess that some of the tracks stuck with me over the years. For Assault, the GameCube is one of my favorite consoles ever, and I put thousands and thousands of hours into the system. Assault would be an obvious favorite if I had also liked 64, as it finally brought Star Fox back to its roots after Star Fox Adventure, which I'd argue isn't as bad of a game as everyone says, but that's a story for another time. As a kid, I was always fascinated with space, and both these games were up my alley. Going planet to planet, fighting threat after threat for the greater good was always a favorite story beat as a kid. I think Assault is more of my favorite if anyone's asking, with the ability to actually leave the R-Wing and fight on the ground with guns, which obviously wasn't groundbreaking concept, was really cool for Star Fox, as well as it being the more cinematic younger brother exploring the darker and sadder themes of war, which caught me way off guard as an adult. Every sound in these games is a pleasure, with lasers sounding how you think they would as a kid, as well as the grandiosity that fighting in space brings with a great soundtrack backing as you take down bogeys trying to execute you. If you're interested in what I'd call light bullet hell with a bit extra to it, I'd urge you to explore these games and their fantastic soundtracks. This game is on Steam right now with the most updated version, which is Golden. I mentioned Persona 4 to be my introduction to the game company Atlus, and if you like interesting mystery stories with a light to dark tone, this will be right up your alley. While it didn't make the top 10 favorite video games list, it is one of my favorite games, and expanded how I saw most turn-based RPGs I played, which was mostly Pokemon. With a great story about a small town in which the main character is staying with his police officer uncle for a short stint, as his parents are off doing something or other for their jobs, the town is soon plagued by a mysterious fog that when cleared up, a dead body is found. It is then believed that the night after each fog, someone will die. This eventually leads you and some friends the MC makes to get involved with the mysterious happenings in the town. A little confusing, but when you see it in the actual context, it makes more sense. The dungeons that you explore throughout the game really put me over the hill, with the backing tracks for each being amazing, making the trek through each a pleasure to play through. My personal favorite being Heaven. Don't let that say much about the general tracks that happen outside the dungeons, as they're also great. I really didn't think much about video game music before I had played this game, but it made me realize how much I loved many different tracks from many different games. I've caught myself humming a good deal of these tracks, even to this day. This is a game I actually didn't beat till 2020, which is not for lack of trying, but more so pure kid stupidity. There was a boss fight that I didn't understand mid-game with a shark, and I used cheat codes to get through the game. So I had beaten the game before, technically, but I really don't think using cheat codes is actually beating the game, although you'll see later on this list, a pass is given. This is one of the very few games I actually 100%ed, and goddamn was it a pleasure. The soundtrack really puts you in the mood and really immerses you into the Australian-made game. There are many days where I just want to play the game so I can go into the levels and listen to the music. The sequel's soundtracks are amazing as well, but this game as my introduction, as well as the world's introduction to Tide the Tasmanian Tiger, was amazing. You'll see a big trend that every game on this list has ties to me when I was a kid, which I guess you could say I've just grown more critical but appreciative and surprised that I still like and don't hate many things from my childhood, with small exceptions. I was actually sad that I didn't put this on my list of favorite games, but I honestly couldn't pick from the first 3 games, as they are each some of my favorites of all time, but that's mostly as a package, although I can definitely appreciate them separately. I couldn't pick just one, and like I said in that video, I didn't want to pick the whole series. Nevertheless, every song in this game lights me up when I hear it, and it was a pleasure to 100% recently, with none getting annoying, even if I stayed in a level for hours trying to find every single opal. I mean, can you even fault me for this? The original Animal Crossing game is the only one I put far, far too much time in, creating multiple characters, paying off multiple debts, all the while some smooth and chill tracks played in the background. Sun or rain, the soundtrack would put you in a relaxing mood, as you plucked weeds, fished, scavenged, and helped the townsfolk do menial tasks that they could totally do themselves, but the soundtrack wouldn't let me stay mad at doing some random shenanigans for long, and everything became a joy to do. I definitely just left my TV on at times, just so I could close my eyes and relax, or otherwise just put myself to sleep while listening to the nice backings. This game is definitely outdated by the newer games, as quality of life changes throughout the series made things easier and easier to do, and this is the only game I'd say go ahead and cheat. Fast forwarding through the days in order to collect things is to me a standard. I know I said I was relatively patient with games in an earlier video. A real-time clock is a different story completely. I wanted to pay off my debts as quickly as possible, and it was always a pleasure to see how my world would grow, or even regress as I fast-forwarded through time. At times, it was bad, but at most points, it was a fun little thing I had actually discovered before I really used the internet, and I likened it to the glitches in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and just thought it increased the charm of the game even further. If you've ever wanted to explore the start of a series, this is a good one to start with. Some things are a little difficult, as I said, with quality of life changes only happening further in the series, but seeing the beginnings is always a cool experience. Okay, this game is weird and, well, in all honesty, just like the box says, beautiful. Another semi-weird game you should definitely add to your list of games to play. The story is that you are the prince of the cosmos, and while playing tennis with your father, the king of the cosmos, and your mother, the queen of the cosmos, suddenly a surprisingly powerful serve by the king creates a black hole that sucks up the entire cosmos, and it is your job to clean your father's mess. If that sounds like any indication of what the game is about, you're not even ready for how it plays. The actual gameplay involves rolling a ball around in order to collect items throughout the planet Earth in hopes to recreate the galaxy with what you pick up, which may or may not be lions, bridges, money, and people. Yes, you heard me right. You can roll up people who then become a planet or a star somewhere in the galaxy. The tracks throughout this game are just as amazing as the game itself. Weird, but flow with the game's charm particularly well, which, if you can't tell already, the charm of this game is completely off the charts. There are multiple games in the series, but this game lasted the longest to me, but that just might be due to me being dumb and somewhat bad at the game. But like Animal Crossing, I could never stay mad for long, as the soundtrack urged me on to try the game. Albeit with threats from a disappointed King of the Cosmos, who started this whole dang mess in the first place. Now, I know what you're most likely saying. Hallway Simulator? No. Incidentally, I could argue every RPG is a damn hallway simulator until it lets you explore the entirety of the world. And this game lets you explore almost right off the bat, comparatively to the first game. I've probably said this to death by now, but this game is another case of playing the second before the first, and I will agree, when I eventually played the first game, the beginnings were a bit of a slog to get through, but when it became more open, I started to enjoy it more. This game starts off with that feeling, with the story following the events of the previous, with some shenanigans involved leading you to time traveling throughout many different eras, and what I would say was an extremely cool experience. I love this game. I love the characters. Even though I hadn't played the first, I really got to know the ones I met throughout the game, and don't really understand when people call them cardboard, because they're extremely fleshed out and you can understand their problems. The soundtrack for this game is great too, and another that I physically own because it's that damn good. With a more techno vibe depending on the place you're in, with a hint of almost futuristic parts, you can get incredibly immersed in the areas you're in. One of my favorite but silly tracks being Crazy Chocobo. With the first time hearing it, I just had to sit there in awe and listen, not believing what I was hearing. This game blew me out of the water and was the first game I had played involving time travel. Though I did play Chrono Trigger much later, I like the soundtrack of this game much more, as I feel it's incredibly immersive, as well as just being a damn good soundtrack. I'd just say, even if you don't want to play the game, definitely give the soundtrack a try. You might be pleasantly surprised with what you find. I'm giving this game a pass on this list because it is a side game to the Final Fantasy series and, until recently, hadn't received the love it deserved. The game is great, but the soundtrack alone puts this game at number 2 on this list. with some of the most immersive video game tracks I've ever heard. I really felt that I was transported into the game. I left the overworld music on my TVs for hours as I did other things like reading or just playing around as a kid, and was actually the first Final Fantasy game I had ever experienced, which is funny due to the fact when I eventually played my second Final Fantasy, which was Final Fantasy X, I was super confused at how different the games were from each other, especially due to the fact that most games with the same general title played relatively the same, as well as the story being completely different. The game recently came out on Switch, with the multiplayer being extremely easier than it was before, and I'd argue the flack it's getting is really unearned, as now essentially you have to repeat the parts you've done before with your friends, but I'd argue is a great boon as you're able to get your stats up 1,000 times faster than you did in the original, as well as needing to do dungeons multiple times anyway in the original order to get the stat boosts. All around, I've had fun with this game. The only reason I was a little iffy about this is because of my unbreakable rule. I've beaten this game, but only through cheating. There's an extremely convoluted part 90% through the game that I only got past through cheating, and then beating the final boss, which, like I have said before, I don't consider cheating truly beating the game, but how convoluted the last part is right before you get to the boss, I'm giving myself a pass. I tried for hours, and it was one of the only times I looked up a guide in order to get the item, and I still couldn't accomplish it. Although that was when I was a kid. There is a 90% chance that it was just me being dumb. Other than that, though, the game is 100% a banger. If you've ever wanted to play it, I can assure you won't be disappointed in the soundtrack nor the gameplay. Here are some honorable mentions for games with amazing soundtracks, but they just didn't make the list.
How crazy are you? Ba-da-bum, 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 ba-dum. Crazy baby. Ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum. Girlfriend, you really wanna make my
Alright, so I've recently watched a JonTron video where he said the soundtrack for Sonic R didn't go with the game, and in my opinion, he's wrong. I mean, to me, this game is interchangeable with almost every single Sonic game's soundtrack, as they notoriously slap, but this is the only game where I explicitly like every single song on it, and feel like it adds to the wonky as hell experience of this game. I actually own the original, but I 100%ed the Sonic Gems Collection version. I actually think they might have fixed a bunch of stuff compared to the original, because the original is basically unplayable, or I've just gotten really terrible at video games compared to when I was a kid, which is entirely possible, honestly. But I swear, I did every goddamn thing there was to do in the GameCube version, and while there were definitely times I would get pissed at Sonic for not going fast enough, the soundtrack would instantly pick me back up. I've shown my friends some of the songs from this game on numerous occasions, and they were mostly surprised at how good the tracks were for how bad they heard the game was, which is why this game is at the top of my favorite soundtracks video and nowhere on my favorite video games video. This one might be clouded by kid nostalgia and how much I was into the Sonic franchise at the time, or the fact that I tried to summon Tails doll, but that's besides the point. To this day, I love the soundtrack with all my heart, and I don't see myself taking any of the songs off my music playlist anytime soon. Alright, another one down and definitely more to come. I really like making this list. I'm getting more and more accustomed to doing them, so I should have a good couple to put out for the next weeks to come. As always, hope you enjoyed and see you next video.